Do you believe that athletes should strictly be involved in sports and not in political decisions? Is it fair to ask countries to change their perceptions on certain fundamental topics that go against their cultural values, even if their cultural values are oppressive? These are personal decisions, and everyone can have different opinions about such questions. Sebastian Vettel has a very different approach to this particular stance. Let's find out what he has to say. First up, Vettel thinks F1 should race in less tolerant countries. Sebastian Vettel is one of the most outspoken racers in F1, and somehow always finds himself on the right side of things. Not literally on the right, but he knows what to say, and his opinions are usually in line with the woke community of social media. That's a good thing, of course, and God knows we need that in the sport, especially after the whole Nelson Piquet fiasco. However, it was surprising to see him being a proponent of the idea that F1 should race in countries less tolerant of LGBTQ+ rights. The general consensus has been that the likes of Saudi Arabia shouldn't get important events because of their certain violations of human rights and their open opposition of the LGBTQ+ community. So when he said, if we don't race, we'd be powerless to make any difference at all, it was a surprising take, but once again, he found himself on the right side of the argument, as he always does. Sebastian thinks that if we give up racing in these countries, we run the risk of never bringing that change in those countries. He's absolutely spot on. This is a window of opportunity, and it should be encouraged rather than shutting off any potential chances of a change. He acknowledged the fact that some countries are tougher than others, but that shouldn't mean they don't deserve the opportunity to change their stance. But he believes F1 can have a positive impact. It seems that Seb is the kind of person that people listen to when he talks. He's very knowledgeable, almost borderline nerd when it comes to F1, but it's awfully nice to see that our heroes and people in positions of power and influence have such views. He understands both sides of the situation, and that's why, talking to the best-selling gay magazine Attitude, the German explained the importance of being polite but firm when dealing with such countries. That's spot on. If you expect the likes of Saudi Arabia to change their views on the LGBTQ community, something that isn't possible because of their religious views, it needs to be done in a patient and gradual way. In fact, it's almost hypocritical of the West to think that they can apply the same model of change because the difference in cultures is huge. There's still a major minority in most Western countries that doesn't support the LGBTQ community. How can we possibly expect the likes of Saudi Arabia and co. to change their opinions overnight, especially when their cultural values are as different as they can be? Vettel understands this particular point better than most people. He knows that this is a fight that will take time, and it's important to stand up for what's important because it will definitely have a positive impact. However, the whole debate is over the way it should be done, and that needs to be gradual. The four-time F1 championship winner said, "Values and principles can't stop at borders," and we couldn't agree more. Up next, Sebastian wears rainbow shoes over the Hungaroring weekend. The former world champion Vettel made a personal decision to wear rainbow shoes over the Hungaroring weekend. He was joined in this polite yet firm stance, with Lewis Hamilton also taking part. This was really nice to see, especially after Vettel was openly critical of Hungary's actions last year. These little gestures might not seem like a big deal to an outsider, but it offers hope to the LGBTQ community, and they're completely harmless, because how can anyone get offended because of some colorful attire? These small gestures can go a long way in changing the views of people, especially when they're taken by some of the most successful people in the sport who are leading the change. Reflecting on his comments from last year, Vettel still believes he did the right thing because he believes because of those comments, more and more F1 fans are thinking and talking about diversity and inclusivity. He also made it clear that he had no ulterior motives like potential fame and popularity because of the comments. Rather, he just wanted to extend his support to the community, and because he'd never endorse anti-LGBTQ legislation. We're so glad to see someone having such balanced views. It's always a particularly pleasing sight when our sporting heroes aren't terrible people in real life. God knows we need good role models, especially in testing times like these. Finally, he believes F1 has changed. The Aston Martin driver also observed that the F1 landscape was gradually changing over time, and it was becoming more and more inclusive and tolerant of the LGBTQ community. He thinks that in the past, people might have been afraid of coming out with their sexual preferences, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, and a gay driver would be welcomed, and rightly so. We're not sure we agree with this particular stance, especially after the Nelson Piquet controversy involving Lewis Hamilton, but to some extent, it makes sense. Of course, the modern F1 scene has more Vettels and Hamiltons than Piquets and Joe Verstappens, but it's still not perfect, and there's a long way to go before the F1 universe can be considered a safe space for the LGBTQ community. For this particular situation, F1 also recently started the We Race as One movement, and Vettel is backing it completely. He's of the view that more and more engineers and mechanics feel more open than they could have done a long time before, and that's definitely a change worth appreciating. He believes that F1 needs to continue doing the same, and it shouldn't only revolve around sexuality, but also in supporting and encouraging women, people of color, those with disabilities, and so on. And now, for some other news. First up, Vettel's sympathy for British GP protesters. The Just Stop Oil activist group has been making appearances all over the sports scene in the last year. One of their protesters locked himself up with a goalpost during a game in the Premier League, and this time, 3 of them breached the fence to sit on the track in protest during the first lap. Vettel sympathizes with the protesters and says that he understands their desperation and acknowledges the problem that's drifting towards us. However, at the same time, he was also explaining how doing something this risky wasn't all right because it was putting many lives at risk. To sum it up, the German agrees with the message, but not with the way the protest was held. He's not wrong. We don't want to see something ugly happen on the circuit, especially after what we experienced with Joe's crash. Next, there were many firsts in the British GP. The British GP was as wild as you could possibly imagine, and there were a number of firsts in an action-packed race. Let us start with the most significant development, which was regarding Zhou Guanyu, who survived a brutal coming together, and if not for the first ever use of halo coming between Guanyu and the road, who knew what could have happened? This was a huge win for safety, and even though many people in the sport had been against the halo device, it single-handedly saved Zhou's life, as said by the driver himself. Another first was a heartwarming occasion when George Russell ditched his home race and rushed to the scene of the crash in a bid to save Zhou, and it was a lovely thing to watch. He could have easily decided to race on, but some things are bigger than the sport, and this certainly was. Other firsts came during the race, with Hamilton finally ending on the podium, but the most pleasing sight had to be for the Ferrari fans, as they saw Carlos Sainz win his maiden race. But that's not all. A certain Mick Schumacher also registered his first points, and Vettel in particular was super happy about Schumacher and explained how he was cheering him on despite trailing his young German counterpart. Finally, Hamilton takes a dig at Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton probably enjoyed his best race of the 2022 calendar year, and he didn't waste any time in landing a dig against his rival, Max Verstappen. Talking to the media after the race, Hamilton praised Charles Leclerc for their wheel-to-wheel tussle during the British GP and pointed out how Leclerc had been more sensible than his experience with Verstappen last year. Yeah, that won't sit right with Verstappen, but if he's got the right backing, he'll use this as an indication that Hamilton is definitely disappointed and still not over last year's defeat. That should spur him on to defend his championship this year. Even though Hamilton specifically asked his fans at the British GP not to boo Verstappen, it's more clear than ever that there's a rivalry brewing, and none of them want the other to succeed. These sweet words and gestures won't fool us, Lewis. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think politics and sports should be kept separate? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.